Your vision goes narrow. Your chest locks up. Your hands start shaking and you cannot make them stop. Right now, in this exact second, your brain is flooding your body with chemicals designed to save your life. But here is what nobody tells you. Those same chemicals are probably going to get you killed. The panic response that kept your ancestors alive for millions of years becomes a death sentence the moment it activates in the wrong context. Your mind does not know the difference between a predator and a car crash, between a physical threat and social humiliation, between real danger and perceived danger. It treats them all the same. And that treatment? It shuts down the exact parts of your brain you need most. The irony is brutal. The mechanism meant to protect you becomes the weapon pointed at your own head. Here is what Ningame te kanta. Most people who die in emergencies do not die because of the threat itself. They die because their brain interpreted the threat wrong. The survival instinct you trust? It is running on software designed for a world that no longer exists. The rules have changed, but your neurological wiring has not caught up. What worked for escaping lions on the savannah becomes fatal in a burning building, a sinking car, an active shooter scenario. The gap between what your panic tells you to do and what actually saves your life. That gap is where most people die. And you are about to learn why. The first mental trap that controls your mind under threat is tunnel vision. Not the metaphorical kind. The actual physical narrowing of your visual field that happens the second adrenaline floods your bloodstream. Your peripheral vision collapses. Your focus locks onto one single point. And your brain convinces you that point is the most important thing in the universe. Here is the nightmare. It almost never is. Studies show that in mass shooting events, people run toward the gunfire because their tunnel vision locked onto the exit sign that happened to be in that direction. Their brain filtered out the sound, the screaming, the bodies. All they saw was green glowing letters that said exit. So they ran straight into the bullets. The mechanism is simple but deadly. When your amygdala detects threat, it signals your sympathetic nervous system to prepare for fight or flight. Part of that preparation involves narrowing your visual field to focus on the immediate threat or escape route. Sounds useful, right? It is not. Because modern threats require spatial awareness, not laser focus. You need to see the secondary exit. You need to notice the person coming from your blind spot. You need to track multiple variables simultaneously. But your panicked brain says no. It says, look at this one thing and nothing else. The metaphor is perfect. Your mind becomes a flashlight in a dark room, illuminating one tiny circle while the real danger moves through the shadows you cannot see. The practical application is brutal in its simplicity. The moment you feel panic rising, you force your eyes to scan. Left to right, up and down. You override the tunnel by deliberately widening your gaze. It feels wrong. It feels like you are wasting time. Do it anyway. Because the 2 seconds you spend scanning could reveal the unlocked door your tunnel vision missed, the weapon within reach, the threat approaching from behind. The consequence of not doing this? You become predictable. And in any threat scenario, predictable means dead. Attackers count on tunnel vision. They know you will run toward the obvious exit. They know you will fixate on their weapon. They know you will not see their partner moving into position. Your tunnel vision does not just blind you. It makes you easy to control. The second rule that your brain hides from you is freeze masquerading as decision-making. You think you are evaluating options. You think you are being careful, strategic, smart. You are not. You are frozen. Your prefrontal cortex has gone offline and your brain is stalling for time by creating the illusion of thought. This is the trap that kills more people than any other panic response because it disguises itself as rational behavior. You stand there running scenarios in your head while the building fills with smoke. You sit in your car reviewing your options while the water rises past the windows. You wait for more information while the shooter gets closer. And the whole time, your conscious mind is telling you, I am thinking this through. I am being logical. The neurological reality is darker. When threat reaches a certain threshold, blood flow to your prefrontal cortex drops dramatically. The part of your brain that handles complex reasoning, planning, and decision-making gets starved of resources because your body is redirecting everything to the parts that handle immediate physical action. But here is the cruel trick. Your consciousness does not realize this is happening. You still feel like you are thinking clearly. You still experience the sensation of making careful choices. But you are not. You are experiencing a neurological simulation of thought while your actual cognitive capacity has been cut in half. Researchers call this cognitive narrowing. You call it being careful. The difference between those two interpretations can cost you your life. The brutal application is learning to recognize freeze before it locks you down completely. The first sign is time distortion. Seconds feel like minutes. You notice yourself thinking the same thought multiple times in a row. Your internal dialogue slows down and gets louder. The moment you detect this, you have maybe 5 seconds before full paralysis sets in. The override is simple. Pick the least bad option and move on it immediately. Not the best option, not the safest option, the least bad option that gets you moving right now. Because motion interrupts freeze. Action breaks the paralysis loop. Even if you move in the wrong direction, you can course correct. But if you freeze, you cannot correct anything. You just stand there running scenarios until the scenario kills you. The metaphor. Your mind becomes a chess player calculating the perfect move while the board catches fire. Here's where the truth hurts. The panic response your body trusts most is probably the one most likely to get you killed in the modern world. The third mechanism that turns your survival instinct into a death sentence is social proof under pressure. Your brain sees other people running left and instantly decides, they must know something I do not. So you run left too. You do not evaluate. You do not question. You just follow. And in that moment of unthinking imitation, you may have just followed a crowd off a metaphorical cliff. Because here is what the science shows. In emergency situations, most people do not know what they are doing either. They are following someone else, who is also following someone else. The entire crowd is a chain of blind following blind, and nobody at the front actually has information. But your panicked brain does not care about that. It just knows. More people moving that direction means safety that direction. The mechanism is evolutionary and hardwired. For millions of years, following the herd actually was the smart move. If everyone in your tribe started running, you ran too. Questions came later. The ones who stopped to think got eaten. So natural selection favored the fast followers. Your genes carry that programming. But the environment changed faster than your DNA could adapt. Now following the crowd gets you trampled in a stampede. Gets you trapped in the wrong exit. Gets you lined up exactly where the threat wants you. Studies of crowd disasters show the same pattern. People ignore clear exits and empty routes because nobody else is using them. They pile up at locked doors because that is where everyone else went. Their panicked brain cannot process the idea that the crowd might be wrong. The practical override requires you to do something that feels insane in the moment. Pause and look for the path nobody is taking. The empty hallway. The window nobody is trying. The door without a crowd. Your entire nervous system will scream at you that this is wrong. That safety is with the group. That you are making a fatal mistake by going alone. Ignore that scream. Because in most emergency scenarios, the path of least resistance is the path of most death. The crowd creates its own trap. The metaphor is perfect. Imagine sheep running toward the sheepdog because they saw other sheep doing it. That is what your panicked brain turns you into. A sheep running toward the thing killing you because everyone else is doing it too. The fourth pattern your mind uses to kill you is threat fixation. Your brain locks onto the source of danger and cannot look away. The gun, the fire, the attacker, the snake, whatever triggered your amygdala becomes the center of your entire perceptual universe. And while you are staring at it, hypnotized by your own fear response, you miss everything else. The escape route behind you. The makeshift weapon at your feet. The second attacker moving in from the side. Your fixation creates a perceptual blindness that is almost total. Studies of violent encounters show victims stare at weapons with such intensity that they later cannot describe anything else about their attacker. Not the face, not the clothing, not the voice, just the gun, just the knife. The threat becomes a black hole in their awareness, warping everything else out of existence. The neurological basis is simple but deadly. Your amygdala has identified the primary threat. It signals your attention system to monitor that threat constantly. Makes sense, right? Keep your eyes on the danger. Except this creates a cognitive trap. By fixating on the threat, you stop gathering the information you need to respond to it. You stop seeing opportunities. You stop tracking changes in the environment. Your entire nervous system locks into a monitoring mode that feels like vigilance but is actually paralysis. You are watching danger approach while your capacity to respond to it shuts down completely. The cruel irony. The harder you focus on the threat, the more vulnerable you become to it. Askuta o Vemagara. The practical application requires you to do something that contradicts every instinct screaming in your head. You have to look away from the threat. Not ignore it, but release your fixation. Let your eyes scan past it to the periphery, to the exits, to the objects, to the other people. You gather tactical information instead of just staring at death. This takes training because it is fundamentally unnatural. Your entire being wants to keep eyes on the danger. But that want is a trap. The override comes from understanding that threats do not disappear when you look away from them. They are still there, but now you are also seeing the things that might save you. The consequence of not breaking fixation is brutal. You become a statue. You stand there watching your own death approach, frozen in a trance of fascinated horror, unable to act until it is too late. The metaphor. Your mind becomes a moth staring at the flame, hypnotized by the very thing burning it alive. The fifth mental trap that gets people killed is the normalcy bias. Your brain refuses to accept that the situation is actually dangerous. It keeps telling you, this is not really happening. It will work itself out. Someone will fix this. You are overreacting. The alarm is probably a drill. The smoke is probably not serious. That person is probably not actually threatening you. Your mind generates 1,000 rationalizations to avoid accepting the reality unfolding in front of your eyes. And while you are bargaining with reality, reality is killing you. Studies show that in building fires, people delay evacuation an average of 6 to 10 minutes because their brain keeps insisting this is not a real emergency. They finish their meal. They gather their belongings. They wait for confirmation. And by the time their brain accepts the truth, the exits are blocked and the smoke is lethal. The mechanism is a defense against psychological overload. Your brain has a baseline assumption that the world is safe and predictable. Accepting that your environment has suddenly become lethal requires your entire psychological framework to shift. That shift is metabolically expensive and emotionally traumatic. So your brain resists it. It keeps trying to fit the dangerous situation into a safe narrative. This is temporary. This is an overreaction. This is not really happening to me. The more stable and predictable your life has been, the stronger your normalcy bias becomes. Because your brain has more evidence that things work out fine. More pattern recognition telling you, this always resolves safely. But that pattern recognition is using historical data that does not apply to the current situation. The metaphor is brutal. Your mind is a broken smoke detector that keeps saying the fire is probably nothing to worry about while the house burns down around you. The practical override is forcing yourself to accept the worst-case scenario as real right now. Not as a possibility, as reality. The moment you detect signs of danger, you tell yourself, this is actually happening and I need to act immediately. You do not wait for confirmation. You do not gather more data. You treat the threat as real until you have concrete evidence it is not. This feels like overreacting. It feels paranoid and foolish. Good. Because the cost of a false positive is embarrassment. The cost of a false negative is death. You can survive looking stupid. You cannot survive being right about danger too late. The consequence of letting normalcy bias run your response is that you will delay action until action becomes impossible. You will use up your window of escape convincing yourself you do not need to escape. And when your brain finally accepts reality, reality will no longer offer you options. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about your own nervous system under threat than 99% of people walking around right now. But do not relax. What comes next is where most people fail even when they know these patterns. Because knowing them intellectually is not the same as overriding them when your amygdala lights up and your body floods with panic chemicals. Continue with me. The sixth pattern that your panic brain uses to kill you is auditory exclusion. The moment real danger activates your stress response, your hearing shuts down. Not completely, but your brain starts filtering audio aggressively. It turns down volume on sounds it decides are not immediately relevant. Turns up volume on sounds it thinks matter. Except it usually gets this completely wrong. People in gunfights report that shots sounded like quiet pops. Victims of attacks report they could not hear their attacker speaking even though witnesses confirm the attacker was yelling. Your brain is not recording reality. It is editing reality in real time based on what your panic response thinks you need to hear. And what you need to hear is almost never what you actually need to hear. The neurological mechanism is called auditory exclusion, and it happens because your brain is trying to reduce cognitive load. Under extreme stress, your nervous system cannot process every sensory input. So it starts making cuts. Audio is often the first to go because your brain prioritizes visual information. The problem is that those sounds you are not hearing contain critical information. The alarm telling you to evacuate. The person shouting directions to an exit. The sound of a threat approaching from behind. Your panic response has decided these are not important enough to reach your conscious awareness. So you move through a disaster scenario functionally deaf to information that could save your life. Witnesses will later tell you, "We were all shouting at you to turn around." And you will have zero memory of hearing any of it. The practical application is understanding that your hearing cannot be trusted when you are under stress. Which means you have to compensate. You have to deliberately check your environment visually instead of relying on audio cues. You assume you are missing auditory information and override that by using your other senses more aggressively. This sounds obvious, but it is not. Most people trust their hearing completely. If they do not hear an alarm, they assume there is no alarm. If they do not hear someone speaking to them, they assume nobody is speaking. The consequence of this trust is that you filter yourself into danger. You miss warnings. You miss threats. You miss opportunities. Your brain convinces you of silence that is not real. The metaphor. Your mind becomes a radio with the volume knob controlled by panic, turning down the channels broadcasting your survival while cranking up static and noise. The seventh mechanism that turns your survival response into a death trap is pain suppression. Under extreme threat, your body releases endorphins and other neurochemicals that dramatically reduce your ability to feel pain. This sounds useful. It is not, because pain is information. Pain tells you that you are injured, that you are bleeding, that you need medical attention. When your panic response suppresses that signal, you continue moving, continue fighting, continue running on damaged tissue until you collapse. People have walked on broken bones during emergencies, have run with arterial bleeding, have fought with penetrating wounds that should have dropped them immediately. They did not feel any of it. Not until the adrenaline wore off and the endorphins faded. By then, the damage was catastrophic. The mechanism is evolutionary. For a brief window, being able to ignore injury allowed your ancestors to escape immediate threats. The gazelle with a broken leg that could still run for 2 more minutes had a better chance than the gazelle that stopped to assess the injury. So natural selection favored the ones who could push through pain. But the calculation changes in modern scenarios. You are not running from a lion. You are navigating a complex environment where ignoring injury can make the injury fatal. You need to know you are bleeding so you can apply pressure. You need to know you are burned so you do not make it worse. You need to know your leg is damaged so you change how you are moving. Pain suppression robs you of that feedback loop. Presta atenção. The practical override is performing deliberate self-checks when your adrenaline spikes. You run your hands over your body looking for blood. You check your movement for signs of mechanical failure. You assess yourself visually. This feels absurd in the moment because you feel fine. You feel strong. You feel invincible. That feeling is a lie your neurochemistry is telling you. Some of the worst injuries produce zero sensation in the first minutes. The consequence of trusting your pain suppression is bleeding out while you feel perfectly okay. Dying of shock while your brain insists nothing is wrong. Worsening injuries by continuing to use damaged limbs because you cannot feel them failing. The metaphor is perfect. Your body becomes a car with the CK engine light disabled, driving itself into mechanical failure while the dashboard shows green lights all the way to the crash. The eighth pattern that gets people killed is decision fatigue compounding under pressure. Every choice you make depletes a finite neurological resource. Under normal conditions, you have enough capacity to make hundreds of decisions per day. Under threat conditions, that capacity collapses. Your brain is burning so much energy managing your fear response that it has almost nothing left for decision making. So what happens? You start defaulting, taking the first option, following whoever seems confident, making choices based on impulse rather than analysis. And each bad decision makes the next decision harder because you have even less capacity left. You spiral into a cognitive death spiral where your ability to think clearly decreases with every choice you are forced to make. The science shows that glucose depletion in your prefrontal cortex happens rapidly under stress. Your brain burns through its energy reserves trying to maintain executive function while also running your panic response. This creates a metabolic crisis in your neural tissue. You start making choices that you would never make under normal conditions. Not because you are stupid, but because the hardware running your decision-making process is literally running out of fuel. Studies of people who died in survival situations show a common pattern. They made one reasonable choice, then a questionable choice, then a catastrophic choice. The descent happened fast. The more decisions they faced, the worse their judgment became. Until eventually they made the choice that killed them. The brutal application is reducing the number of decisions you have to make. You pick simple rules and follow them. You do not evaluate every option. You do not try to optimize. You execute on good enough and move forward. This means accepting suboptimal choices to preserve your decision-making capacity for when you really need it. Every choice you do not have to make is cognitive energy you can save for a critical moment later. The consequence of trying to make perfect decisions under pressure is decision paralysis followed by decision collapse. You spend your mental resources on choices that do not matter. Then when you face the choice that does matter, you have nothing left. Your brain picks randomly or defaults to impulse. The metaphor. Your mind is a battery with 10% charge left, and you are spending it on deciding which shoes to wear while the building burns. Here is where the nightmare gets specific. Would you actually break fixation if you saw a gun pointed at your face? Would you override your normalcy bias if an alarm sounded during dinner? Would you force yourself to scan when your vision narrowed? Drop it in the comments because I want to know. I want to hear about the moment your brain lied to you. The time you froze when you should have moved. The situation where you followed the crowd and later realized they were wrong. Because understanding these patterns intellectually is just the first step. Recognizing them in your own past experiences is where the real learning happens. The ninth trap your panic brain sets for you is the complexity collapse. When adrenaline peaks, your cognitive capacity for handling complex problems drops to almost zero. Multi-step processes become impossible. Abstract thinking shuts down. Your brain can handle maybe one variable at a time. Everything else becomes noise. This is why people in burning buildings forget how to open doors. Why trained professionals fail to execute procedures they have practiced hundreds of times. Why someone who knows CPR freezes when they actually need to perform it. The knowledge is still in your brain, but your panic response has locked you out of accessing it. You become functionally incompetent even though you are technically skilled. The mechanism is brutal in its simplicity. Your prefrontal cortex requires significant energy and time to process complex information. Under threat conditions, your brain decides it does not have that energy or time. So it shuts down the complex processing centers and gives you access to only the most primitive response systems. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Those are your options. Everything else gets locked behind a neurological wall you cannot breach. Researchers call this cognitive narrowing. You call it panic making you stupid. Both descriptions are accurate. The more complex the task you need to perform, the more likely your panic response will prevent you from performing it. The practical override is simplifying everything before the crisis hits. You break complex procedures into single-step actions. You practice until the steps become automatic. You reduce cognitive load by eliminating choices and creating simple if-then rules. If I see fire, I move toward the nearest exit. Not, if I see fire, I evaluate the size, assess the smoke patterns, calculate evacuation routes, and optimize my path. Just, see fire, move to exit. The simpler the rule, the more likely your panic brain can actually execute it. The consequence of relying on your ability to think through complex problems under pressure is total cognitive failure. You stand there knowing what you should do but completely unable to translate that knowledge into action. Your skills become useless because the panic response that is supposed to help you survive has locked you out of your own competence. The 10th mechanism that kills people is the momentum trap. You commit to an action. You start moving in a direction. And your brain becomes incapable of stopping or changing course even when evidence screams that you are wrong. You are running toward an exit that is blocked but you cannot stop running toward it. You are trying to break through a window that will not break but you cannot shift to a different escape route. You committed to a plan and your panic brain has locked you into that plan regardless of whether it is working. Studies show that people die within feet of alternative exits because their brain could not process the idea of changing direction mid-crisis. The neurological basis is commitment escalation under stress. Once you take action, your brain wants to validate that action. Stopping and choosing differently feels like failure. Like wasting time. Like admitting you were wrong. So your stress response pushes you to commit harder. Try harder. Force the plan to work through sheer persistence. This is sometimes called action fixation. You fixate on making your chosen action succeed rather than evaluating whether it is the right action at all. And while you are committed to failure, alternative paths remain available but invisible to your narrowed awareness. Your momentum becomes a prison. You cannot stop, cannot pivot, cannot adapt. You just keep executing a failed plan until it kills you. Continue a comigo. The practical application is building in forced evaluation points. Even under pressure, you give yourself permission to abandon plans that are not working. You set mental checkpoints. If this does not work in 5 seconds, I try something else. You practice changing direction abruptly during training. You make course correction a habit rather than an exception. This feels wrong because commitment and persistence are usually virtues. But under threat candida, they become vices. The ability to quit a failing approach and switch to a new one is often what separates survivors from casualties. The consequence of momentum trap is dying while better options existed within reach. Spending your final seconds trying to force open a door that will never open while an unlocked door sits 10 feet behind you. The metaphor is brutal. Your mind becomes a train on tracks, unable to turn even as the bridge ahead collapses into nothing. The 11th pattern that destroys your survival chances is sympathetic nervous system override of fine motor control. Your hands shake. Your fingers lose coordination. Your ability to perform delicate manipulations collapses completely. This is not weakness. This is neurological design. Under threat, your body redirects resources away from fine motor skills and toward gross motor movements. Running, striking, pushing, those work fine, but anything requiring precision? Typing a number into your phone, threading a key into a lock, operating a small mechanism. Your panic response has made those actions functionally impossible. The mechanism is blood flow redistribution. Your sympathetic nervous system diverts blood to large muscle groups and away from extremities. Your fingers get less oxygen, less glucose. Your fine motor cortex gets deprioritized. The result is that your hands become clumsy instruments. Things that would normally take you 2 seconds now take 30 seconds. Or do not happen at all. People die because they cannot dial emergency services, cannot unlock doors, cannot operate simple mechanisms, not because they do not know how, but because their panic response has stolen their manual dexterity. Studies of firearm incidents show that trained professionals experience massive drops in shooting accuracy under real threat despite perfect accuracy in practice. The physical mechanics fail because the neurological control fails. The practical override is training gross motor responses instead of fine motor ones. You practice striking with your palm instead of making a fist. You practice using your whole body weight instead of finger pressure. You adapt tools and mechanisms to require less precision. You build redundancy so that when fine motor fails, you have gross motor alternatives. The consequence of relying on fine motor skills under pressure is watching your hands betray you. Fumbling with keys while a threat closes distance. Dropping your phone while trying to call for help. Unable to work a simple mechanism because your fingers will not obey your brain. The metaphor. Your hands become tools controlled by someone else, moving in ways you did not intend, failing to execute commands you know you sent. The 12th mechanism your brain uses to kill you is time distortion, creating false urgency or false calm. Under extreme stress, your perception of time warps dramatically. Seconds feel like minutes, or minutes feel like seconds. Either distortion can be fatal. If time feels slow, you move too cautiously. You think you have time to evaluate when you need to act now. You deliberate when you should execute. If time feels fast, you rush. You make mistakes. You skip critical steps because you feel like everything is happening too quickly. Neither perception matches reality, but both control your behavior completely. The science behind this is fascinating and terrifying. Your internal clock is controlled by dopamine and other neurochemicals. Under threat conditions, those chemicals flood your system in unpredictable ways. Some people experience time dilation where everything slows down. Others experience time compression where everything speeds up. Neither group is experiencing objective reality. Both groups are experiencing a neurochemical hallucination of time. And both groups make decisions based on that hallucination. The survivor who thought they had 30 seconds when they had 5. The casualty who thought they had 3 seconds when they had 30. Same crisis. Opposite hallucinations. Both fatal. The brutal application is ignoring your time perception completely. You do not trust your sense of urgency or your sense of calm. You use external metrics instead. Count seconds out loud. Check your watch. Use environmental cues rather than internal feelings. This requires understanding that your panic brain is lying to you about time as much as it lies about everything else. The consequence of trusting your time perception is moving at the wrong speed. Acting too slowly because you felt like you had time. Acting too quickly because you felt rushed. Either way, your timing becomes your enemy. The metaphor is perfect. Your internal clock becomes a broken watch, showing you times that have no relationship to reality, making you early or late to your own survival. The 13th pattern that gets people killed is social inhibition under threat. Your brain decides that certain actions are socially unacceptable. So even when those actions would save your life, you do not take them. You do not want to look paranoid. Do not want to seem rude. Do not want to make a scene. So you stay in the dangerous situation being polite while danger closes in around you. Studies show that women especially fall victim to this pattern. They do not want to offend someone who is making them uncomfortable. Do not want to seem dramatic by leaving a situation that feels wrong. So they stay. They smile. They engage politely with the person their instincts are screaming at them to escape from. And sometimes that politeness gets them killed. The mechanism is social conditioning layered over survival instinct. Your amygdala detects threat, but your prefrontal cortex immediately calculates the social cost of responding to that threat. What will people think? How embarrassing this will be if you are wrong. How rude it seems to just leave. That calculation overrides your threat response. You stay in danger to avoid social awkwardness. Your brain literally prioritizes not looking stupid over not dying. This seems insane when you state it clearly. But it is what most people do most of the time. The social mammal programming wins over the survival programming because for most of human history, being rejected by your social group was as deadly as facing a predator. The practical override is giving yourself explicit permission to be rude, to make a scene, to look paranoid. You decide ahead of time that your survival is worth more than someone else and Apo's comfort or opinion. When your gut screams leave, you leave. You do not explain. You do not apologize. You do not soften the message. You just act on the threat signal without filtering it through social acceptability. The consequence of prioritizing politeness is dying while being considerate. Becoming a victim because you did not want to hurt someone and Apo's feelings. Ignoring warning signs because acknowledging them would create awkwardness. The metaphor is brutal. Your social conditioning becomes a cage you build around yourself, locking you inside with the threat because opening the door and walking out would be impolite. The 14th trap your panic brain sets is the planning fallacy compounding under pressure. You overestimate your ability to execute complex plans. You underestimate how much time each step will take. You assume conditions will remain stable. None of these assumptions survive contact with reality. But your brain keeps making them anyway. So you build elaborate escape plans in your head that have zero chance of working. And while you are trying to execute the impossible plan, simpler options get ignored. Your brain falls in love with its own cleverness and that love kills you. The mechanism is optimism bias meeting cognitive narrowing. Your brain generates plans based on best-case scenarios. It filters out complications, ignores Murphy and Apo's law, assumes you will maintain current capacity throughout the crisis. Then when you try to execute, everything takes 3 times longer than you thought. Every step encounters obstacles your planning did not account for. Your capacity drops as stress increases. The plan falls apart but you keep trying to make it work because your brain has committed to it. Studies of failed evacuations show people wasting critical minutes trying to execute complex plans when simple plans would have worked fine. They gathered belongings, made phone calls, secured property, all while the actual window of survival closed on them. The practical application is embracing simple stupid plans. You do not optimize. You do not get clever. You pick the most direct action and execute immediately. Leave everything behind. Take the first exit you see. Move fast and do not stop moving. Your brain will resist this because it feels like giving up without trying. Like you are not using your intelligence. Good. Your intelligence is compromised right now. The stupid simple plan has a better chance than the smart complex plan because the stupid simple plan can actually be executed under your current cognitive capacity. The consequence of clever planning under pressure is paralysis by analysis followed by plan failure followed by death. The metaphor. Your mind becomes an architect designing a beautiful house while the ground beneath you opens into a sinkhole. The 15th and final mechanism that your panic response uses to kill you is the exhaustion spiral. Panic is metabolically expensive. Your body burns through energy reserves at an unsustainable rate. Adrenaline and cortisol flood your system. Your heart rate spikes. Your muscles tense. Your brain runs at maximum capacity. All of this consumes enormous amounts of glucose and oxygen. And you can only maintain it for so long. Studies show that peak panic response lasts maybe 15 to 30 minutes before your system starts crashing. Your thinking gets fuzzy. Your movements slow. Your judgment collapses. You hit a wall where your body simply cannot maintain the stress response anymore. And that wall often arrives at the worst possible moment. The neurological reality is that you have a limited panic budget. Every minute of high stress costs you resources you cannot replace in the moment. If you burn through your reserves too fast, you collapse before the crisis resolves. But your panicked brain does not pace itself. It goes maximum output immediately. This makes sense for brief threats. Spry. NT away from the predator and the crisis is over. But modern emergencies last longer than your panic response can sustain. Building fires. Extended evacuations. Complex escape scenarios. Your body runs out of gas while you still need maximum performance. And when the crash comes, it is total. You go from operating at 200% capacity to maybe 30%. Everything becomes harder. Your survival odds plummet. The practical override is managing your stress response deliberately. You take controlled breaths to keep your heart rate from spiking into the red line. You relax muscle groups that do not need to be tense. You create micro moments of calm to prevent full system burnout. This feels wrong because relaxing seems like giving up. Like not taking the threat seriously enough. But the alternative is spiking hard and crashing fast. You need to maintain a sustainable stress level that keeps you alert and capable without burning through your reserves. The consequence of sprinting emotionally through a marathon crisis is collapsing before the finish line. Running on empty when you need one more burst of speed. Cognitive failure at the moment you need clarity most. The metaphor is perfect. Your nervous system becomes an engine redlined from the start, burning itself out, seizing up just as you reach the critical turn. You came here thinking panic was simple. Fear response activates. You react. You survive or you do not. Now you know the truth is surgical and brutal. Your panic is not trying to kill you. But it is running on code written for a world that no longer exists. And that gap between the threat it expects and the threat you face? That gap is where people die. Not from the danger itself. From the response to the danger. From tunnel vision. From freeze disguised as thinking. From following crowds into traps. From fixating on threats while ignoring solutions. From normalcy bias keeping you calm while your environment becomes lethal. From trusting senses that your panic has distorted beyond recognition. The transformation is not about eliminating fear. Fear is information. Panic is your nervous system trying to keep you alive. But that system needs supervision. Needs interruption. Needs override. You have learned the mechanisms. Now you need to train them. Because reading this gave you knowledge. But knowledge is not skill. Skill comes from practice. From triggering these responses under controlled conditions and practicing the overrides until they become automatic. Until your panicked brain and your conscious brain can work together instead of fighting for control. If you want more content that tears apart the lies your mind tells you under pressure, more science on what actually keeps people alive when everything goes wrong, subscribe to this channel. Next week I am breaking down the exact mental framework that makes intelligent people take fatal risks. The cognitive blind spots that turn rational humans into their own worst enemy. The moment when your confidence becomes the thing killing you. Your mind saves. Your mind kills. The difference is knowing when your brain is optimizing for a threat that is not there while ignoring the one that is.